Hey friends, this lovely, almost theater curtain-like background is my hotel room in Toronto, Canada, where I just arrived. Maybe you can tell by my bleary eyes that I've been traveling all day. I got here an hour ago, hour and a half ago. I mean, truly just arrived. Came to my hotel. I am here to have a hernia surgery performed. There's a hospital here that is essentially recognized as the best hernia surgery facility, hospital, anywhere. That's all they do. Um, and this trip has an interesting history, I guess, interesting to me, in that I had booked this surgery to take place years ago. Like, I had this place booked during the pandemic, before the pandemic. And when the pandemic happened, they, of course, shut down shut down all travel. They shut down any kind of like people waltzing across borders to have elective surgeries. It wasn't happening so much, as you may recall. So then it got pushed. And then there were some years where it was like, it felt difficult for me to be able to make it up here to do this, because then there's, of course, a recovery period afterwards, which you're going to hear all about if you stick with this post. Um, but but anyway, long story short, it took me quite a while. I've had at least two other schedulings that then, for one reason or another, got bumped. And as I was rolling into this one, it was like I couldn't tell if it was a sign from the universe being like, chill, don't do this, or if it was like a build up to a threshold, and I needed to acknowledge that there was a threshold here, and that there's an energetic transition that's going to take place. I didn't know that my passport had expired until yesterday morning. So I had to, in addition to my travels up here, I had to travel down to El Paso, Texas, to go get a brand new passport this morning, and then get on a plane from El Paso, Texas, up to here, instead of flying from my hometown of Albuquerque. I had a beautiful trip with my wife. She agreed to accompany me on that road trip. And and over the course of that trip, it's really kind of remarkable, because over the course of that road trip, we had a set of conversations. You know, there's these conversations that it feels so important once you're having it. It feels so obvious that you would talk about these things once you're having the conversation. But somehow, either in your daily routine of life, there's just not time for it. Or, you know, we just had a wonderful trip together as a family down to Tucson, in which we were in the car for much longer than the drive to El Paso. But Annalise is in the car. Our daughter's in the car. So you just have a different kind of conversation when you're on a trip like that. And this was just, I would say, in the time that it took us to get from home to where we spent the night, which is not quite in El Paso, 3.5 hours or so, I became totally sure that this trip was the right thing. And then my subsequent travel, which basically was, you know, most of the today, I had this sense. I started reading a book by Edmund Sprunger. It's called Helping Parents Practice. And it's a book about helping your kids practice a musical instrument, basically. And it's, of the books that I've read that are about that topic, it's the best one by far. And in addition to a lot of things which I may or may not at some point share on this post, because it's stuff I like to talk about, but in addition to the actual content, what struck me about this book, or about reading it, was that it fascinates me. Thinking about the relationship between a parent and a child, or a parent and a youth, and what happens in that musical relationship, in the relationship as such, but music creates such an incredible opportunity, and such an incredible context, such an incredible universe to interact within. I love it. It fascinates me. And I found myself really kind of excited, really kind of empowered. There's a sense in which I had been, and I think to some extent have been, struggling recently with a feeling of, I spoke a few days ago on my post about hearing John Vervaeke talk about how when we move to a place that gets us beyond egoic fixation, when we move to a place of not necessarily like full enlightenment, but when we move to the spiral of growth, as he calls it, the spiral of evolution, where our identity is expanding, our influence is expanding, our autonomy is expanding, our communion with our connection to others is expanding, we get to a place where all of the tools and mechanisms and processes and resources that we otherwise might marshal in order to bolster and support the ego, all of a sudden become available to devote to the world, and we start to actualize the evolution of consciousness. We start to actualize the natural spiritual impulse towards ever greater expansion in the world, not just in ourselves. And I took that both as a really inspiring description of how, of what a deep and effective spiritual practice looks like, but also as a bit of a challenge, because I was like, why do that? Maybe sometimes no. and I found myself going, I gotta get there. That just sounds right. And reading this book today about, because that's something I've noticed for a while, working with my daughter gets me off myself. That is one function that it has, and I've heard that many, of course, people talk about how their kids are really instrumental in expanding their sense of identity, right? But I mean, that's almost like, I don't want to diminish it, but it's almost too easy, because your kids, we're biologically connected to them. They inherently imbue us with this selflessness. That's almost like biological programming. It's not necessarily spiritual transcendence of our egotism. It's just our ego is connected to our kids in a way that we feel as though we're as invested in their growth as we are in our own, or their survival, or their success. And that's not necessarily healthy. But if that movement out of ourselves isn't just strictly about serving our own kids, serving our own sort of like biological programming needs, then it can become a gateway. It can become a portal to something else, where that relationship is a model of a relationship we can have with the entire world. And it's one of the most beautiful things about having a child, I think. And it's one of the most, in some ways, challenging practices. And it's something that, as I started to reflect on it in reading this book and thinking through the sort of some of the just really salient, really smart comments he makes about how to think about this, it feels like my service in many ways, or let me just say it like this, that's an element of service that I very willingly and very enthusiastically perform. And I could expand on that. I could build on that. I could do more of that. Because it's fun. And I like it. I started drawing connections to other books I've read, thinking about how to use insights from other domains that are applicable to musical practice, and especially that parent-child relationship, but that aren't coming out of the musical discipline. So it was very exciting, and as a component of what it means for me to take off for 5-6 days and be away from home, connect with myself, heal myself, go through a procedure that's going to help me heal, feels very appropriate, and I feel very lucky that that's coming through for me. Feels like a good use of time. Feels like the right trip at the right time. Even if I had to fight for it. So, that's where I am today, folks. I will tell you more tomorrow. I'm in this thing. Tomorrow's admission. Following day is my surgery. You'll hear all about it. Not all about it, but you'll hear some about it, whatever I'm capable of saying. But thanks for watching. I appreciate you. I'll see you soon.